How you doing? Thank you. Being asked to do these things is kind of strange. I just asked Yvonne when she invited me to, do you want me to present Zero G's as a kind of a studio presentation or what? And she said, well, no, I'd like it to maybe just be your journey that people might be interested in terms of you know, how I ended up doing what I'm doing. And I've been doing it for the guts of 35 years. And about 21 years ago, I was asked along to a small symposium in NCAD, and the question that was raised by the symposium is, what does it take? And 21 years ago, I decided that the focus I'd give that is, well, what does it take to sustain a creative life, or to maybe sustain a studio? So in some ways, going back over the slides and thinking about things, I don't know if it's a revival of that thought. I'm sure I can squeeze the word in a few places. But it's interesting just to reflect on what sustains you creatively. Because I think when you choose to enter this world, it's kind of strange when you're in a commercial art sphere. You know, are you an artist? Are you commercial? Is there a difference between those? What's the relationship that you have with it? How do you bring yourself fully to the work, and how do you sustain that without burning out? So that's in a way what I'm going to run through in 222 slides. So I was told we're grand till the Angelus, so apologies in advance. So just to start, I used this before. I was asked back in the day of Offset, this was my opening slide, and it's still true in the sense of that I always could relate to Pigpen and Charlie Brown. I was always that guy that, you know, had a bath and was immediately dirty, you know, and anyone I knew who wanted to do design wore white jeans and didn't perspire. I didn't fit the mold. And I ended up in NCAD in 1985, I was accepted into product design, industrial design, but went into foundation, thankfully, and spent a year there, which was kind of like a de-education year. It's really useful. Dropped out at one stage, went into product design, dropped out, went off to America, work on building sites, found myself in the strange position of working in Boston, where I was the only non-native Irish speaker on the building site. And a lot of those things informed how I look and I think in the world. But a lot of what I'm interested in, and I'm still interested in, 40 years later, everything is about people and about stories. This is a little book that I made at the time that was just observing people, maybe reflecting on myself, and wondering about what's going on for them. I mean, what's curious is this little match. My son had never seen this book, and he came back one day with a tattoo on his forearm of that match. So that was a revival. He just didn't know he was reviving something that I had done in 1985, long before he was born. And it's all these stories, usually people stuck in their heads, stuck in memories, stuck in relationships, or wishing they were stuck in relationships. And then when I left, it was pre-internet, and I decided that I'd make travelling around Europe. I travelled around as a student. I'd won a travelling bursary, and I was offered a job in Copenhagen, in a design company there, and decided to work in Burger King instead. But I used the time to visit various different design companies, and it was really interesting to find myself in Copenhagen, where I went and visited 11 Danes who had designed the core identity and strategy for Novo Nordisk. And then I went to visit Contrapunct, and they had designed the guidelines for the identity that 11 Danes had done. And then I went to see a company called Peter Bausted, and they had designed the brochureware following the guidelines by Contrapunct, using the identity that 11 Danes had done. So I said, that helped me understand that stratification of design. So I always thought, how do you swim upstream so you're not just executing other people's work? That was useful. But anyway, I headed off around Europe with the intention of 2 months' worth of Interrail tickets, with the intention of maybe If I found work along the way, great. If I didn't, I'd end up in Prague, get a job as a waiter and see where that took me. And this was a book that I took with me as a little CV, and it was about the idea of change. And like this too shall pass, essentially. About these ideas of fleeting moments that we have in our lives. And this idea of revival comes back again, that I'm really interested in intergenerational continuity. I'm not a fan of design or creativity having to be a particular youth niche that marketeers exploit to try and be cool. I don't really care about being cool. For friends who don't know any better, they think I'm cool approximate. Most people know me, no I'm not. So this is my dad, my brother and myself. So anyway, I didn't make it to Prague. I made a phone call from Zoo Station in Berlin the day before my tickets ran out. And on the payphone, the guy who hadn't been in every time I phoned over the previous month happened to be in Joop Ritter. And he said, can you start on Monday? So I scratched out the ticket to Prague, went to Rotterdam and started working in a company called Proforma and in Rotterdam. And this was the early days of Macintosh, and at the time Macintosh had, Apple had a really sophisticated piece of software called HyperCard, which you could code. And one of the projects I did at the time was creating an identity for the company, Proforma, that I worked in. And it just consisted of 2 orange fluorescent squares that were printed. But that little HyperCard program could generate words at random. So it would drop 3 words into one square and a little illustration icon into the other. And what always interested me is me positive now, or never speak, gone, or future good, house. All of these things are picked randomly, but whoever's reading them puts meaning on it. So I was always interested in this idea of how people will impose meaning on things. And we think we're guiding that, we're creating that, but all those people in those stories and the lino cuts, they have their own thoughts and memories and associations that they'll bring to anything that we do. So why future ethic? So this idea of randomness and how people give things meaning was something that, and still interests me. I believe we create vessels that other people fill. And say this was a card I made at the time, Christmas, New Year's card, where all the pictures on one side were provided by the members of the design team based on a formula that I gave them to go to the local library based on the date of birth. They'd find a book with that number code and they would pick an image at random from the book. And then I got Michael Snitker, designer I was working with, to do the typography on the reverse side of the page. And because it was on 60-gram paper, the two came together. It was totally random, didn't mean fucking anything, but everyone gave it meaning. Because it's the randomness of life. And I'm also interested in place. So when I was in Rotterdam, I was fortunate enough to work with a place called the Lantern Fenster, and it was a combination of the Project Art Centre and the IFI. And they used to have a glossy A4 programme that just felt that kind of generic art centre kind of thing. And what I wanted to do was lean into the sense of Rotterdam. So the ink here is bled. I think it originally was the Dutch word for mother, but it now reads murder. So I don't know what his relation to Buddhisma was. But the guy, this is the guy, and he used to deliver beer to the Lantern Fenster. And Falkert was a photographer who commissioned to go out and take portraits of Rotterdammers. And 2 weeks after this was published, Falkert had a knock on his door with one of this guy's friends, I think a former substance user, and he had a gun in his hands. And he asked if he could have a portrait taken with his gun for use on the next cover. So that didn't happen. Instead, the Rotterdam Friet girls with their mayonnaise. This lady is a second-hand bookseller in the market that used to take place in Black, and she had 2 tables. One table was second-hand porn, and the other was Bibles and fiction. So she asked to be photographed in front of the fiction. Well, we all know all porn is fiction, so. This was the DJ who used to work in the Lantern Fenster. He subsequently set his hair on fire, he's now a skinhead. And this was a man from Suriname who was taking part in a festival in Rotterdam. And it's Michael with his Oku t-shirt. And the whole thing about this is that the design would evolve and change. We designed a typeface called Elve Grotesque that was intentionally kind of a little fucked up and based on the vernacular typography that you found on the Binnevech, which was one of the older parts of Rotterdam at the time. And this was also at a moment of change. So this was intentionally leaning into all these slight differences. You might change the size of the type by half a point, so people couldn't tell it was different, but it just felt wrong. So this was all an exercise in people feeling comfortable criticising how shit this was. And it was great. We got letters of complaint, and the people who wrote the letters of complaint came in to see us, and one man came with a bag of books to show us what good design looked like. And that was intentional. We wanted to open a conversation rather than present ourselves as being a slick authority where, shut up, we know what's best, this is taste. And that would involve scraping the film and various different things to just bring that sense of texture into it. So anyway, 1995, I've been there 3 years. I decided it was time to leave Rotterdam. I was offered work in New York, but thought I was better off coming back to Dublin. Most of my friends were Donnelly and Morrison Visa guys who ended up in New York and are still there. So I came home, decided I'd work 3 days, teach 1 day, and play 3 days. And that worked out for a little while. I joined a company called DesignWorks. The first thing I was asked to design was a business card. And Mary is now my wife for the last while. I came back to Ireland because I wanted to do stuff that felt culturally relevant to me. New York was all about scale. That's all I heard people talking about, how big the salaries were, how big the companies were, where Dublin at the time felt more interesting. And I did things like the National Museum. I did an identity for Ireland, first All-Ireland identity as part of Tourism Ireland. That was a pretty Good Friday Agreement. So it was really nice to lean into things that felt culturally relevant to myself, and where there's a sense of dialogue that was taking place in the work that was being created. That wasn't just about, well, is it good design, but what does that mean? And at the time as well, I was interested in encouraging the company to do self-initiated projects. This is the cover of a book that was designed for a diary in 1999, where we created a grid that had an intersecting point for each week of the year running up to the year 2000. And one corner was where DesignWorks was, one corner was the centre of Guinness Brewery, and the other corner was the centre of Croke Park. And I sent a lad out with a little Polaroid camera to take photographs at each point, so it's totally random. He didn't decide what the shot was. He couldn't use wide angle, couldn't use up close. So it's an exercise, and also you won't see it really on the side, but I'm interested in how things age. So it was done in velvet, so as people used it, it would get shittier and shittier, or get better and better, if you want to lean into it that way. This was the remnants of a dust jacket for a book I designed in 2000. And again, this was a gentleman who works up in Arbour Hill, and he got people to sign the book, and because he used it so much, this is how it turned out. It had Seamus Heaney's hands on the front. Perry Ogden took a portrait of Seamus holding the book, so it was a bit meta. But anyway, I'm going to have to move quicker. Then we did a project for the hospice, another project which was with Bono, where Gavin Friday did a recording of Peter and the Wolf, and what I wanted to do is do a book that felt timeless. And at the time, Bono's dad had just died, and so we made it an intergenerational project where he illustrated with his kids, and my kids were nippers too, and they did some of the drawings in here as well, some of the flowers. And again, I'd be quite happy spending my life working in black, white, red and grey. I don't really think you need other colours, but some people like them. And this was work that I was doing while at the same time doing stuff with SuperValu and Centra and Brown Thomas and a lot of retail and FMCG clients. And I felt really burnt out. It was the height of the Celtic Tiger. And so I just needed to let the tail go. So I had a choice, do I hang on or let go? I decided to let go. At the same time that I was getting out of my spider hole, Saddam was caught in his. And So it started, this was the first zero-G gift, where I used to go to Muji every year, find an object, and then take ownership over it. So there was a little torch being used to check Saddam's mouth, so we bought everyone a little torch, put it in a little kind of plastic case, and then created a wrapper that had this information on it that helped people identify themselves. So I was trying to find myself and find what I wanted to do if I wasn't a partner in a larger firm. So that led to me setting up Zero-G. And the intention with Zero-G was not to work with middle managers, not to work with FMCG, not to work specifically with brand managers, but to work with people who actually wanted to achieve stuff rather than just drive sales. And also wanted to publish stuff. So Ciaran is here. She worked with me on our first little publication, which was Naughty Words, which was trying to capture the spirit of the naughties, but it's also an excuse for me to sit down with my dad and have him translate some of the words into Irish. You know, so ground zero, or foot in the mouth. Though I have a really lovely memory of my dad. We were in our first studio in Pembroke Street, and Ciaran was working away on the project down in the far corner. And my dad's a real Connemara man, a little bit kind of, We were talking anyway about touch sensitivity, and the drawing was of a woman masturbating. And he was very uncomfortable having the conversation with Ciaran in the room. But so we were talking about anyway, how do you translate touch sensitivity into Irish, or words like bada bing, or those kind of things. And then more recently, then 10 or 12 years later, we went from Naughty Words, which was silver and white, emulating the iPod at the time, which was seen to be the pinnacle of design, to 2018, we did this in the middle of the first presidential period with the lovely Donald Trump. And this was looking at same kind of approach to illustration, but we were looking at different words that had meaning in the teenies, like gig or Grenfell. These are the minutes from a meeting at the local council where they're celebrating how they finished doing the cladding on the building. Or other essential things like, well, this is spring. We tend to forget about the Arab Spring. It started with a lot of hope, and there was revolutions in all these countries, supposedly fueled by Facebook. And we now know where we are there. Or essential things like understanding the Kardashian family tree. Other things we produced was an openness book where we invented this tool, and this helps open people's minds. Some people think it's a doorstop, but it's not. That if you apply the right equation, which is this, and you take your tool out of the book, you can use it to separate an idea from someone who wants to undermine that idea. It also works for fear, but you need an angle of 25%. Ignorance is 18. Doubt is 45 degrees. It's a little bit of a more blunt instrument. And we sent these out to friends and clients. I remember meeting a guy from Davy Stockbrokers who said he opened it on Christmas Day and had an argument with his kids about if these were the right angles to be using to separate people from these feelings. How to ask an open-ended question. Key part of practice in Zero-G is conversation, and it's how you keep it open. It's not about being authoritative. I know I'm talking a lot right now, but it's a strange situation. But how you open a conversation, how you allow people to reveal themselves, how you allow people to be honest. Creativity, if you can read upside down. And projects like What Happens Next is a Secret we did with Emma, and this was lovely because we didn't know what was happening next. We printed a book in one colour. They changed the objects in the exhibition, so we overprinted that book with something else and folded it in a different sequence. They changed it again, And so some of the projects we do, it's just this overprinting, this accretion. And sometimes things don't have to come back, they don't have to be revived. You just layer over things that already exist. Because that's what we all do. You can't really revive something, it's there in the ether, people have different connections to it. But the mainstay of what we did was identity. This was an identity we did for someone up the road, yes, no, XX, XY, base, acid, right, wrong. These are the binary natures of scientific methods. O and 1, Science, Art, Science Gallery. So we named and branded the Science Gallery with Michael John Gorman and Trinity back in the day. We did an identity for Solstice with Grafton Architects. Mad for the Birds, me. But this was based on creating a typeface that would work as a stencil, where with just a few of these figures you could create an entire alphabet that was then used to go onto light boxes that were built into the front of the building, as well as being used on other areas of signage and typography within the various different publications that were done. And then what we were known for a while was we did the Abbey Theatre for 10 years. And when we started this project, we made a book for everyone in the audience. And, you know, what we're about is change and helping people see themselves differently. So while people come to us to look different, we're into how do people go on a journey that helps them see themselves in a different way, that opens them up to new ways of acting and thinking. And so everyone was given their own little book. And there was a different photograph on the back of each one. That was an image we had taken from the Abbey. And we created this before we started the project, because at the back of the book was the brief that we had set creatively. So you get people to buy in, you frame the argument. If you frame the argument, you're going to win it. If you frame the argument, you're going to create the possibility. And we went through, you know, we tend to avoid the, here's 3 solutions, pick one. You know, you can have multiple solutions. But we gravitated down towards the A, bringing the 2 together. It's not rocket science. And it's nice to see AAD and Wove bringing this forward with the recent refresh that they did. Again, it's really, you know, this identity exists for about 15 years. And it exists now in a way, but just in its refreshed form and in a new way. And I think that that's important. That's my daughter at the time. Still is my daughter. And part of what we do is it's often thinking about, at the time it seemed that every poster had to be range left, every photograph was an actor coming out of the shadows dramatically. So our strategy is it's only going to be white posters, we're going to use centre axis typography. It's not about a single sans serif font, it's like there's 5 different typefaces you can use on this. So it's about texture, it's about underlying traditional structure, and then use images that are asymmetric and create tension. You know, so these were the initial sketches that we were doing. These are the initial guides. This is a newspaper that my dad, he won an essay competition in the late 50s and came up to Dublin as a 19-year-old and started working on O'Connell Street in this, in a new newspaper. And the headline font here kind of informed, you'll see the letter R is the defining element. And we brought that into redrawing a typeface to take on some of those characteristics. And also with the books, they used to be A4 full colour brochures that you got. So we changed them to single colour, brought them down to a smaller format so they could be perfect bound, and printed it in Pantone 418, and then did a wraparound cover. So we wanted that anything we created, people wouldn't feel that they could just fold in half and leave behind. We wanted to create a sense that people saw this work as being as much the creative output at the theatre rather than a bit of ephemera that's not essential. So what was interesting about this is people started to collect the programmes, and even if they didn't get to see the work, they were contacting the Abbey to see if they could gather that. So it's this idea of trying to create things that feel timeless, that have an inherent intrinsic value within them. And you can do that without having to go down the luxury Brown Thomas route of that notion of Patek Philippe as the only language of continuity. So Tales of Ballycumber was one of the early slides. I can go in, I'm going to run through this because I have another 700 slides to get through. This was nice actually. Conor McPherson was really upset that we were doing white posters. He sent in a load of stuff saying everything he showed us was a black photograph with someone coming out of the shadows. And he kept, anything we did, he kept rejecting. So I said, for fuck's sake, what do we do? Well, the best thing to do is burn the poster. So I went out to the garage with a printed poster that was just blank and burned it. My son was thrilled to bits because he was with the matches while I was with the camera. And so we photographed it at various different stages of being burnt. So he had his black poster in there. It just was still within the strategy of white posters that we wanted to keep. And we had it at various different stages. So these are some of the things we did. And it was nice in that it afforded different designers opportunities to create their own posters. And I always love how stuff goes out on the street and is enhanced. So this is some of the stuff we did. I'm going to repeat what I did at Offset and saying I don't have time to show you this video, so I won't. We created guidelines, and what's interesting with guidelines is just how you bring a little bit of personality into them. You know, lead actors in supporting roles, how you can start to convey the spirit of what you're looking to achieve. Things can have texture. Guidelines don't have to be this kind of banking guideline manual where it's, you know, all about Helvetica and control. You know, and even little things here, you know, in keeping with the character, some colour variation is acceptable. It's okay for things to shift. That's part of the process. We don't get that anymore with digital print, but when you're doing lithography and stuff like that, all that variance is okay. So what I'm going to show you now is just a load of symbols. Conscious of time. How am I doing? All right? Yeah. Let me know when you're getting itchy, because I know it's morning and people have to get to work. So this is the client. This is my very first client, and it's the second project that I did. So Fergus, Karen, you'll be well familiar with Fergus. So basically I had a client, our very first client went bust after the crash. He headed off to America, and he found himself working in healthcare in Omaha, Nebraska. He had convinced Blue Cross Blue Shield to give him $65 million to set up a health centre that was based on primary care. I could go into that story, but I won't. But basically, primary care is about these levels of multidisciplinary care that are about keeping people healthy rather than being incentivised to do interventions. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Axarben in Omaha, Nebraska, but it's the fucking arse end of nowhere. It's an old race course. Axarben is Nebraska backwards. It's classic Midwest inbred inversion. And I found myself on Friday the 13th of June sitting in this breeze block building in 40 degrees of heat with all the windows closed. And I turned up to present the identity to the client. And you might guess I talk a lot, but I didn't say that much that day. I just put this up on the screen in the dark, and it was playing slowly, and I just explained that it was based on the proportions of the Fibonacci series, and because there's going to be so many screens within this building that we wanted a dynamic identity. So I said, Fergus, there you go. So he kind of sat looking at this and looking at me. And I'd only arrived in the night before. You know, I'd taken a plane to Atlanta, another one from Atlanta up to, I think it was Chicago, and then down to end up in the equivalent of Knock Airport in Nebraska. And took about 26 hours to get to him. And his response after being shown this piece of work was, you came all this way and all you have is a fucking circle? A fucking circle? That it? And I was uncharacteristically quiet and just sat there in the dark with him staring at this thing, muttering a fucking circle. And after about 2 or 3 minutes, he started to riff on this. He spoke about how we were sitting there on Friday the 13th. He was kind of recognising that those proportions of 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13 in the Fibonacci series. He spoke about what that number meant to him. He started to talk about how that slowing people down and creating time is what was most important to him. He started to fill the fucking circle with meaning. And that's at the heart of what we do. We give people vessels that they can fill with meaning. Just like those 3 random numbers with pro forma, or us imagining the thoughts going on in other people's heads. How do we afford them that rather than put a sticker on their heads and say ABC1, 17-year-old interested in whatever. So the fucking circle was great in movement, but when we went to put it on the front of the building, that was a little trickier. So it took us about 3 or 4 months working with a crew in Kansas to work out how to use ceramic inks. So the way we achieved that colour was just by using pure, because this had to work during the day and work when it's backlit at night. So all of these kind of shapes is actually what you see there at a distance. It was massive. And we designed wallpaper, we designed all the art, we designed all the screens, all the wayfinding. So what started life as a fucking circle ended up as a whole environment that was actually informed by post-Vatican II churches in Ireland, if you believe it, but we don't have time for that. So fucking circles, some you borrow, like from the Minotaur. This was for a company that we branded in San Francisco. This was for UDG Healthcare based on the Penrose patterns. This was for GIAF, the Galway International Arts Festival. It's current, actually, it's over in Osaka for Ireland, Japan, the whole initiative that's taking place this year. It's better in colour, but I like black and white. The Design and Crafts Council broke the circle up, split it out. This is for an event that's taking place in London with various architects called Architects for the Birds. It's an aid of cancer charity in the UK, Lion Site. This was the Labour Party, where we brought them back to the ploughy star, starry plough. And so they own red, but here it is in black and white. And what was interesting here is the original flag had 8 points. The INLA and Continuity IRA used the starry plough, but it's the 5-pointed star like the Americans and the Chinese. So it's interesting when you want to revive, this is genuine revival, revive a traditional symbol, but give it that sense of ownership and a contemporary sensibility. Love birds me, there's the bird, this was Fingal, this has been around for 21, 22 years. We did this for the United Nations Security Council. Ireland were bidding to get a chair at the table, and so we worked on a strategy for that. We were up against Norway and Canada, and this is the identity we created with Izzy worked on this. And Creative Ireland. Again, these stories, oftentimes creativity is presented as this explosion. You know, we all know the trope of the exploding, disruptive creativity, where actually we see creativity more as being a piazza, a little bit like what, CreativeMornings and Ivan is doing here. It's like you're creating a space that draws people in. It's not always about the explosive talent of the designer. It's about the space that a musician or a playwright or a designer or an artist, what's the space that they create that draws people in, rather than that brilliance of light that blinds people to how fabulous that person is. There's nothing wrong with the latter, but it's interesting when we think about the former. And then we did stuff like Revival. Well, it was always there. It's owned by Guinnesses, but if it's pointing to the left, it's allowed to be used by the Irish state. So we worked on this in 2017. That's a simplified version. And it was interesting to, we got a lot, it's obviously telling me to move on. We developed an identity. It was funny, I didn't imagine I'd be doing all this stuff when I left Rotterdam to try and do stuff that felt relevant at home. But we did the branding for the 2016 centenary, and that proved to be such a success that people, the government asked us to have a look at bringing some of that thinking to a unified identity. So we developed this. We got a lot of phone calls of abuse from various design companies that had designed new identities for various departments, and we were putting them out of a job, so we just said, just go and learn service design and fuck off. But it was interesting then, because some people, I always found it strange that at some point, and I don't know when, but public service as an idea seemed to be a pejorative term. You go into some of these semi-states and go, we want to look like we're a private business, as if that's a good thing. And we would work with plenty of PLCs. But there's something quite special about what it is for people to come together in an act of generosity and care and create a social democracy. And you know, I don't know if countries are made by accident or design, or communities are made by accident or design. It's kind of both. But it's always interesting how events accelerate things. So in some ways, COVID meant that every agency in the land was going, can we be part of this program, please? We want people to recognise that we're not out to take advantage of them, that actually there's benefit in terms of us having services that are our own. So the accident of COVID supported the design intent of actually introducing an identity system that was trying to bring a degree of clarity and consistency to communication. And that ended up where we created 54 different campaigns, so I found COVID very hard. I was under a lot of pressure, and it probably broke me if it be told. But at the same time, I've always drawn, but I set myself at the start of 2020. I was feeling a bit disillusioned with just constantly doing the work that I did. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but I just felt the journey a little bit lost. So I started to do a drawing every day, and I didn't know it was going to turn into a visual diary for COVID. So this was a drawing at home, just at the early onset. There's that revival of the... this was about the day that New York was declared a major disaster area. These were the ads and public announcements I was doing at the time. A lot of time waiting at night to get sign-off on press ads, and you had 10 minutes to get the artwork out to 8 of the national newspapers and then the 54 local newspapers the following morning. So, hang on a minute, I think I found the off switch. That's the pandemic coronavirus remote control. So all these various different things. My son gaming, trying to be positive. He wondered if it was his imagination or if anyone else noticed his twitchy eye. Sometimes the work was the work. Anyway, it passed. It was replaced by the Odessa steps and Ukraine and various other things. So I continued this. I stopped after about 1,000 drawings and the Banshees of Inisherin, and returned to work. So it was interesting. Back in the 90s, I designed this, and it was a piece of work I was quite proud of. And it was very much leaning into the history of the very first Irish typeface was commissioned by Queen Elizabeth I to convert the Irish population to Protestantism. It was immediately countered by some guys that fucked off to Louvain to do a Catholic Bible in a different font. So the politics of typography informed this. But it's nice that it became a vessel and we updated it. We were lucky enough to be selected to do the refresh, and the museum asked if we could keep the core identity, but we evolved it. So working with Max and Signal and Jason and Louise and the team evolved the identity. And when we think about identities, we're also just thinking about them in terms of systems. Some of the stuff here is bleeding out, and it's not showing up on the screen, but this is like Torval and Dean or Strictly. I'm not going to read this out, but what you don't see with this work is a lot of what we do is writing, and it's writing stories. And when we develop something and we talk about that meaning, we put a little bit of cordial in the bottom. We don't just leave it totally empty, And so when we were looking at the museum, we started to look at the idea of what it is for something to be a real object, the power that actually having something real in front of you rather than experiencing it digitally, and leaning into those kind of ideas and celebrating just the power of those objects. Nearly there. But in some ways, you're grand. We're in the last few slides here, so hopefully I'll bring it in on time. Jesus, who the fuck's that? So this is the world that Ciaran came into. That's Ciaran's desk there, still with a cathode ray screen. It's kind of really hard to imagine the space. And as you can see, the aesthetic is very much Pigpen. I hadn't quite got the clean desk and the white jeans yet. But this is where we started in Pembroke Street. And in some ways, the one thing that's been most interesting in terms of, and challenging creatively, is what it is to establish a studio and have it grow. And no one trains you for that. I find it easier to be a designer than I am to be someone who operates within a studio or is someone's so-called boss or business partner or whatever. So what started out initially on my Todd very quickly joined by Ciaran and Dave and Sally. This was us after a year, as we were moving out of Pembroke Street and heading off to Cable Street. And that's when we went off then. We were in existence 2 years. We went off to Krakow because Ross, here at the end, there was 2 girls from Poland who were working in the Spar on Cable Street. Lovely young women. One was a dentist in training and the other was a doctor in training, a lot smarter than any of us. But we went off on a school tour to Krakow and met the girls and went to the art college and various different things. And that kind of sense of that kind of wider interest or dynamic, a bit like the self-publishing, has always been an important part of what we do and the culture. And that's where we were then by 2010. And these ideas, we would get referrals where people would say, look, head down to Cable Street, sit on the couches, have a chat. We don't know where it'll lead, but it'll be useful. And we always appreciated that referral, because it's not about a style, or it's not about they're cheap or they're quick, or it's just about have a chat, see where it takes you. And we still have that set up. So this was us in 2012. And then I was joined by 2 business partners, Jason, who had worked with me in DesignWorks, and JP, who comes from a strategy and research background. Very different personalities, very different skills, very different people, which is what you need. Doesn't always make it easy. And so in some ways for me it's been an acclimatization as you move from running your own gig and having a particular way of doing things. And this is the crew that we have at the moment. And each of them are beautiful people in their own right and talented in their own ways. Sive works from Galway. Kaylee is with us here now. This is her Amsterdam years, I think. And Kaylee is a great designer and focuses in on digital. Siobhan and Adele are the trainer sisters who kind of keep us shipshape. We don't have account executives. Everyone gets to engage directly with clients. We don't have this suits concept. Then Kate Sheehan and Kate Mack down here. Sork is a copywriter. Rob is a documentary maker who writes and makes videos. Laura is our longest serving team member beyond myself. Louise is a rock. And what's lovely, in some ways, Louise is representative of what we really love and lean into, and that she has a background in various different things, fine art and in health, and that sense of life experience and bringing that sense of empathy and engagement is really important. A lot of what we do is run workshops, focus on culture, work with people, let them own what we do. And Grace works from Limerick and focuses on digital. So that's where we are now. I asked Kate Sheehan if she could just put together a little show reel. So it's 2 minutes and then we're done. So how are we on time? Good. So 2 minutes, 20 seconds. So I just asked Kate, just put together a show reel that just gives a flavour of the kind of studio we are now. Because in some ways a lot of what I've focused on are things that are interesting to me, but we're a lot richer, broader church than this 58-year-old middle-aged bald guy. It should have sound, but I don't think actually it needed. It was some kind of let's see those hands type of dance music. So this is Making In. We did with Joseph Welsh. This is Gap. It's an eco organisation. Briary Gap is a art space. Kaylee, you might jump in on some of these if you feel like it. But it's representing the kind of range. We do a lot of work with tech platforms in the States. Coming out of COVID, 50% of our work were American-based clients. Not American clients in Ireland, clients in America working with us from here. This was a global payment platform, Grow-Getters based in New York. This was part of a values piece for Sharp, Forsta. This ad here was running in Times Square when they launched. Monkey Shine is a really lovely arts organisation. This is a lovely video that was animated by Louise here. This was an identity we did for Cillian Murphy for his little company, the museum, you know. Pinergy Energy Company. We've done a lot of energy companies. We did Bord Gáis Energy, Energia back in the day, Bord Namona. This is just about the idea of breathing. That was their old homepage. These are based in the States and across Europe. They do packaging for pharmaceuticals. And then this is PSB. And again, language, copy lines, stories, videos. Storytelling is what we're about. Nearform was they're a software company, and this is the kind of shit we do in the studio, which is great. We meet once a month in person. We do Pechakucha talks. We have various different kind of activities. Try and get away once a year. These are the Flower Girls. But in some ways, my proudest thing is the people in Zero G, and having contributed in some small way to establishing a particular space that is very different than when myself and Ciaran were working together, but still very much the same. We don't enter competitions, though if people want to, they can. We do our Archive 100, our 100 archive. We don't have a boardroom. If you come into the studio, it's there's plenty of rising damp because the building's from 1870, wood chip wallpaper. And there's no, when I worked in design works, the designers were hidden downstairs while the boardroom is where all the awards were. And that's great for some, but that sense of transparency and about we're all just floating in space and passing through here is kind of very much part of what sustained me. There have been times I've burnt out, but there's always been that sense of support, and you know, that deep sense of desire to connect with other people has kind of kept us going. So that's me, and that's it. 222 slides before breakfast, and thank you.